Her stepsister tried to take everything on engagement day. The Alpha King chose her instead. Nadia had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not because of nerves. Not the good kind, anyway. She had woken up at 4 because the florist in her could not sleep, knowing there were still 2 centerpieces sitting half-finished on her kitchen table, and the florist in her was, honestly, the most reliable part of her. More reliable than her appetite, which had gone missing sometime around Tuesday. More reliable than her voice, which had developed a small wobble she was pretending wasn't there. She stood in her kitchen in an old sweatshirt and cut stems in the dark. Dahlias. Ivory and blush, the ones she had special ordered 3 weeks ago. The ones that had cost her an embarrassing amount of money and that she would not let anyone else arrange because she knew exactly how they needed to sit. Loose at the top, tight at the base. The way something looked when it had been growing wild and someone had only just decided to pay attention to it. That was the thing about Nadia. She always paid attention. She just wasn't always the one getting paid attention to. By 6:30 she had both centerpieces done. Her hands were green from the stems, and there was a small cut on her left thumb she hadn't noticed until the blood hit the white dahlia and she had to replace it. She did it without a sound. She replaced the dahlia, wrapped her thumb, and started on the ribbons. Outside, Columbus was already getting warm. It was the kind of July that felt personal, like the heat was specifically aimed at you. In 6 hours, there would be 43 people in her mother's backyard. There would be string lights and catered food, and her fiancé, Dominic, giving a toast in that easy, confident way he had, the way that made rooms lean toward him. There would be a tent, white with scalloped edges. There would be a ring on her finger, modest and perfect, the one she had quietly pointed at in a shop window 4 months ago and then pretended she hadn't. There would also be Priscilla. There was always Priscilla. Let me tell you something about stepsister dynamics before we go any further. Because people hear stepsister and they think Disney. They think one of 2 things, either the mean one or the one you love like blood. Priscilla was neither, which made her harder. She was the kind of person you couldn't quite accuse of anything. She showed up. She remembered birthdays. She said the right things at the right times, and she said them in a voice that was warm enough that you believed her, mostly. She had been in Nadia's life since she was 12, and Nadia was 9, when their parents married and moved everyone into a house in Hilliard that smelled like someone else's cooking for the first 2 years, until it finally started smelling like theirs. Priscilla was smart, and she knew she was smart. She was beautiful, and she knew that too. But what she really was, what Nadia had understood from a very young age and could never quite say out loud without sounding like a jealous little kid, was someone who understood rooms, who understood what a room wanted and then became it. It was a gift. It was also an algorithm. You couldn't hate her for it. Nadia had tried. It didn't work. What she could do was notice things. And what Nadia had noticed over the past 4 months, since Christmas, to be specific, since a dinner where Dominic had laughed too long at one of Priscilla's stories about a trip to Portugal, was a small and specific thing. The way Priscilla touched her own collarbone when Dominic talked about work. The way Dominic's eyes moved when Priscilla walked into a room. Not obviously. Not in a way she could point at without sounding paranoid. Just in a way that made Nadia press her thumbnail into her palm so she didn't say something she couldn't take back. She got to her mother's house by noon. Her mother, Adaeze, was already in the backyard, directing 2 cousins to move a table 3 inches to the left, and then 3 inches back to the right, and then back to where it started. Adaeze was the kind of woman who had strong opinions about table placement, but could not articulate why until the table was wrong. Nadia. Her mother looked at her the way she always looked at her, which was like she was checking her for damage. You look tired. I'm fine. You slept. Yes. A lie. The kind of small lie that costs nothing. Her mother looked at her for another second, deciding whether to believe it. Then she cupped Nadia's face in both hands. This woman who was 61 years old and still had the hands of someone who gardened and cooked and held things together, and said, "You look beautiful." Nadia believed that one, or she tried to. She went to work setting up the centerpieces. There were 6 tables and she had 6 arrangements, and she moved through the tent with the focus of someone who needed a job to do, which she was. Her hands knew what to do when her brain was loud. That was the thing about flowers. They required your full attention. A stem too long and the whole thing was off. A stem too short and it couldn't reach water. Everything mattered by exactly the right amount. Around 1, the catering team arrived. Around 2, her aunt and uncle pulled in with 4 cousins. Around 2:30, Priscilla appeared in the driveway in a red dress. A red dress. Nadia had asked. In a group text, she had specifically said, the only request she made, please no red, it photographs oddly with the flowers. She had said this. She had been specific. Priscilla had even responded with a heart emoji, which meant she had read it. The dress was red, the kind of red that knew it was red. Nadia looked at the dahlia she was adjusting, which was ivory. She adjusted it, then she adjusted it back, then she went to greet the guests. The first time she saw Ezra Boateng, she didn't know his name. She was coming out of the tent to check on the parking situation. 3 cars had arrived in the past 10 minutes, and her mother's driveway was the kind that required a geometry degree. When she heard Dominic's voice near the front gate, loud and comfortable, the way he got when he was with work people. Dominic had brought his business partner. She hadn't known he was going to bring his business partner. This was a small thing. She registered it the way she registered most small things, quietly, and without making a face. She registered the man himself differently. He was standing next to Dominic with a glass of sparkling water. Not sparkling wine, not the rosé her mother had put out. Sparkling water. In his own glass, apparently, because she hadn't bought sparkling water. He had brought his own sparkling water to an engagement party. He was taller than Dominic by maybe 3 inches, which meant he was tall, and he was built the way men were built when they either worked very physically or had spent a long time in a gym, not for vanity, but because it was what they did in the mornings instead of scrolling on their phones. He had a face that was not pretty. Pretty was the wrong word, more like the kind of face that made you aware of your own, which was a very specific and slightly uncomfortable thing to feel while you were trying to count parking spaces. He wasn't smiling at whatever Dominic was saying. He was listening. That was different. That was the thing Nadia noticed first. He was actually listening, not performing listening. He looked up, saw her looking, nodded. The way you nodded at someone whose name you didn't know, but whose presence you'd already catalogued. Nadia nodded back, looked away, thought, sparkling water, and went to solve the parking problem, because someone had to. The party worked. That was the word she kept using in her head. It worked. The food was good. The tent held the light right. The string lights came on at exactly the moment the sun dropped to the right angle, which was the kind of thing that looked planned, but was actually just luck, and Nadia checking the weather app 4 times. Her uncle Chukwu told a story about her as a 7-year-old that made everyone cry laughing. Her mother danced, briefly, to a song on the speaker that nobody had requested, but that appeared, and that Adaize seemed to take as a personal gift from the universe. A cousin she hadn't seen in 3 years said she looked exactly the same, which was both a compliment and a kind of lie, because she was 26 now, and 26 looked nothing like 22. Dominic was on. This was the thing about Dominic. He was always on in rooms full of people. It wasn't performance exactly. It was more that he had discovered early that people liked him, and had leaned into it, with the dedication of a man who had found his one true skill. He moved through the tent refilling drinks and clapping shoulders, and remembering details about people's lives that he had stored 3 months ago, and was now deploying with the accuracy of a man who had done his homework. She loved him. She had loved him for 2 years. She was wearing his ring. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm, lightly, not because anything was wrong. Priscilla sparkling. That was the other word. She was sparkling. She had the gift of the spark, which was that she could pull light from whatever source was nearest and make it appear to come from inside her. She told a story about an art gallery she had visited in Rome, one of those stories that started with a misunderstanding and escalated beautifully, and 8 people in the tent laughed at exactly the right beats, and Dominic was one of them, leaning forward with his elbow on the table. Nadia straightened a dahlia that didn't need straightening. From across the tent, she felt a gaze, not intrusive, not pointed, just aware. Ezra Boateng, still with his sparkling water, watching her fix the flower she had already fixed. She moved away. She went inside to get napkins at 7:15 because they were running low and because she was always the one who noticed things like napkins running low. She had always been the one who noticed. It was the thing she was best at and the thing that cost her the most. She walked through the back door into the kitchen. The house was quiet. Behind her, through the glass, 43 people were laughing and eating and existing. She opened the cabinet under the sink where her mother kept extra napkins. And then she heard it. She heard Priscilla's voice, from the hallway bathroom, low and careful. And then she heard Dominic's voice. The bathroom door was cracked. She had not opened it. She was standing in the kitchen with her hand on the cabinet, and she was not moving. She didn't hear the words. That was the thing. She wouldn't be able to say later what was specifically said. What she heard was a register. The register of Dominic's voice, when it was close to someone it was comfortable with. A voice she recognized not from direction but from texture. She had heard that voice for 2 years. There was a silence after it that was not an absence of sound. It was a specific silence. It was the kind of silence that told you everything by telling you nothing. She stood very still, her thumbnail into her palm, hard. The mark would be there 3 days later, and she would find it in a different life. She took the napkins. She went back outside. She smiled at someone's aunt, who said the flowers were just gorgeous. Where had she gotten them? And Nadia said she had arranged them herself, and the aunt said she was so talented, you must be so happy. So happy, Nadia said. Dominic made his toast at 8. He was good at toasts. This was a known fact. He had a particular talent for narrative, for pulling a moment out of the past and holding it up in a way that made the room see it with him, made the room feel like they had been there, like they already loved the story. He talked about the farmer's market, a Saturday in September, 2.5 years ago. He talked about her in the way he talked about good things, with precision and warmth, the way you talked about something you wanted to keep. He said she had had mud on her sleeve and her arms full of ranunculus, and she had turned around when he said "excuse me" and looked at him like she was deciding whether he was worth the ranunculus. He said he had spent 2 years trying to convince her he was. The tent made a sound, the soft collective intake of a room that had decided to feel something. Nadia was looking at him. He was looking at her. She was smiling, and she did not know, entirely, what her face was doing. The toast ended. Glasses up. 43 people cheered. And then Priscilla stood up. This was the thing. She did it naturally, fluidly, the way she did everything, with a kind of ease that looked effortless because she had practiced effort for so long it had become invisible. She picked up her glass and she said, in that warm, calibrated voice, that she had something she wanted to add. Their mother smiled. Of course. Priscilla always added beautifully. The tent settled to listen. What Priscilla said, in that careful and warm and devastatingly composed voice, was that she had been keeping something, and that she loved Nadia, and she loved their family, and that because she loved them, she could not keep it any longer. She said she and Dominic had been seeing each other. She said it the way you announced a minor complication to a plan. Measured. Sorry, but certain. The tent did not make a sound. The tent was 43 people holding completely still. Nadia felt the sentence the way you felt a car stopping. Not the impact, the stopping, the sudden absence of forward motion, when a second ago everything had been moving. She looked at Dominic. Dominic did not deny it. What Dominic said was, "I'm sorry, Nadia. I think I've known for a while." He said it like that was an explanation. Like knowing for a while was a thing that happened to him, rather than something he had done. The tent held still. The string lights held on. The dahlias in the 6 centerpieces, ivory and blush, arranged that morning with a cut on her thumb she hadn't noticed until the blood hit the white, sat exactly where she had put them. This is what she would remember. Not the words. Not Priscilla's face, which had settled into something that looked almost like relief. Not her mother's face, which had gone from a smile to something broken in the time it took to understand a sentence. What she would remember was a sound, or the absence of one. The tent full of her family going so completely quiet that she could hear the string lights humming against the poles. the particular hum of a thing still working when everything around it had stopped. She would remember an aunt taking one step backward, as if physically clearing space for the news. She would remember the catering staff near the tent flap becoming extremely focused on the table behind them. She would remember that Ezra Boateng put down his glass. That was all he did. He reached out and he set the sparkling water down on the table next to him. Slowly, deliberate, and then he looked at Dominic. Not with anger, with the particular expression of a man who has just watched something reveal exactly what it is. The way you looked at a thing that had been claiming to be one thing and had just finished explaining it was another. Nadia looked at the ring on her finger, modest and perfect. She had pointed at it in a shop window 4 months ago, which was around the same time Dominic had first started looking at Priscilla at dinner, which she now understood was not coincidence, but a different kind of math entirely. She took the ring off. She put it on the table, between 2 dahlias, the ones she had arranged. She said nothing. She walked inside. The kitchen sink was cold, and she ran water over her wrists because her grandmother had taught her that. Run cold water over the pulse points, her grandmother had said, when you feel too much. Let the body remember it is still a body. It still works. That hasn't changed. So she ran the water. Behind her, through the glass of the back door, she could hear the tent beginning to reorganize itself around the thing that had just happened. Voices, low and rapid, the kind of voices that sounded like debris after something falls. She could hear her mother saying something to someone. She could hear an uncle saying Dominic's name the way men said names when they were trying to figure out how angry to be. She ran the water. She heard the back door. She did not turn around. "Do you want me to leave?" His voice, lower than she would have guessed. Not soft. That wasn't the right word for it. It was the voice of someone who was used to rooms where things were decided. A voice that had learned that being calm was often more useful than being loud. She did not know this man. He was Dominic's business partner. He had been in her family's backyard for 90 minutes. She had exchanged exactly one nod with him all evening. She should say yes. Obviously. She should say yes, please leave. I don't know you. What she said, instead, was, the sparkling water. You brought your own. A pause. Then, the venue didn't have Topo Chico. She laughed. It was a small laugh. A broken one. The kind that comes up before you have time to stop it, and she was appalled by it. This was the worst night of her adult life. She was standing at a sink running water over her wrists, while 43 people rearranged themselves around the wreckage of her engagement in her mother's backyard, and she laughed. She was grateful for it. It was the most real thing that had happened in the last 10 minutes. He leaned against the counter across from her. Not close, the right distance. He wasn't performing comfort. He wasn't filling the space with words. She turned off the water. She turned around. He was looking at her the way she had noticed him looking at her once across the tent. Not at the spectacle, not at the story, at her. The specific her that was currently standing in a kitchen with wet wrists and a cut thumb and a mark on her palm that hadn't had time to fade. Most people, when something went wrong, looked at what had gone wrong. At the event, at the drama, Ezra was looking at her the way you looked at a person who was doing the thing they did when they were holding it together and you wanted to make sure they knew you saw the holding. It was too much. She looked away. "You arranged the flowers," he said. "How did you know?" "You touched the dahlias 3 times during the toast." She processed that. He had been watching her adjust the flowers during the toast. Not the toast. Not Dominic. The way she moved through the tent, touching things that were already done, already right, touching them anyway because she needed something to do with her hands. "Occupational habit," she said. "No," he said. "You were nervous." She looked at him again. "I was checking them," she said. "You were nervous," he said. Not arguing, just stating. "You knew something was off. You'd probably known for a while, so you kept moving, kept fixing things, kept your hands busy." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the tent murmured. "You don't know that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't." Another silence. This one was different from the last one. The one in the tent, the one full of stopped motion. This one had air in it, room to move around. You brought Topo Chico to my engagement party, she said. Dominic invited me last minute, he said. I wouldn't have come if I'd known. Known what? He looked at her steadily. That this was going to happen tonight. I would have made sure it happened somewhere private instead. She frowned. You knew? I had a strong suspicion, he said. About 2 months ago. And you didn't. It wasn't my place, he said. I told Dominic that if he didn't handle it, I would. He told me he was going to talk to you. I believed him. She thought about this. She thought about the fact that a man she had never spoken to had been aware of her fiancé's behavior long before she'd been ready to name it, and had tried to do something about it, and had failed, and had still shown up tonight with sparkling water because he had been invited and he was the kind of man who showed up. I'm sorry, he said. And this was not a performance of sorry. It wasn't the kind of sorry that was trying to do something. It was just a clean, direct acknowledgement that something had happened and it was wrong. She nodded. Her thumbnail found her palm. She stopped it. I'm going back out, she said. Okay, he said. She went back through the door, and he went with her, not in front, not beside her in any demonstrative way, just back through the door when she went through it, the way you moved through space with someone when you decided to be where they were. The tent had reorganized. This was the word she kept using because it was accurate. A party didn't end when something happened in it. It reorganized around the thing that had happened. Her uncle was standing with Dominic in the corner, talking in the low, serious voice of a man who was keeping himself in check. Her mother was sitting with 2 aunts, crying, being held. Priscilla was standing near the dessert table, very still, very composed, recalibrating. The catering staff had made themselves useful, clearing plates. The string lights were still on. Of course they were. Lights didn't know what had happened. Nadia walked to the center of the tent. 43 people looked at her. She said, and her voice did not shake. She still did not understand how her voice did not shake. She said, "Thank you all for coming. The food is paid for. Please stay and eat." And then she walked to her mother and she put her arms around her and held on. Her mother held on back. That was enough. For right now. That was the only thing that needed to happen. People ate. This was the thing. They actually stayed and ate. Not all of them. Dominic left with minimal drama, which she was grateful for, because the alternative was a scene and she had no scene left in her for tonight. Priscilla left shortly after, and Nadia did not watch her go. Some of the cousins stayed longest, the way cousins did, because family disasters were also somehow community events, and the food was genuinely good. An aunt brought her a plate and said nothing, just put it in front of her and sat down. She ate. She was surprised by this. She had thought she wouldn't be able to eat. But she was 26 years old and she had been awake since 4 in the morning, and she had cut dahlia stems and driven to Columbus and spent 6 hours making an engagement party work. And her body, apparently, had decided it had opinions about dinner regardless of what her heart was doing. Her grandmother used to say, "The body is rude. It keeps its own schedule." She thought about that. She ate the food. She saw Ezra once across the tent, speaking to her uncle. Not about her. She could tell by the body language, by the way her uncle laughed at something he said. Just talking, being where he was. He had a gift for that, she was starting to understand. For being exactly where he was, without making a project of it. By 10 o'clock, the tent was mostly empty. The cousins had gone. Her mother had been walked inside by 2 aunts and was now presumably being told the things you told someone after a night like this. The catering staff was packing up with efficient, professional neutrality. Nadia was loading the centerpieces into her car. She couldn't leave the dahlias. She knew this was a strange thing, loading flowers into her car at 10 p.m. after the worst evening of her recent life. She also knew she had paid a embarrassing amount for them, and they were in perfect condition, and she would put them in her apartment, and they would last another week, and that was something. She was bending down to fit the last one into the back seat when she heard footsteps on the driveway. "Can I help?" Ezra asked. "I have it," she said. He waited anyway. She fit the last centerpiece in, closed the door. They stood in the driveway. The street was quiet. The house behind them was lit up, windows yellow. He said, "I know this isn't the moment." She looked at him. "I'm going to give you my card anyway." He reached into his jacket pocket and held it out. It was a plain card, just his name and a number. No title, no company name, just Ezra Boateng and a set of digits. She looked at the card for a moment. Then she looked at him. She thought about the sparkling water, the nod across the tent, the way he had said you were nervous without making it a question, the way he had stood in the kitchen across from her and looked at the real thing. "When the moment is right," he said. She took the card. She put it in her pocket, with the green-stained fingers and the dirt from the stems and the corner of a napkin she had folded and refolded during the toast without realizing she was doing it. "Drive safe," she said. "You too," he said. She got in her car. She didn't cry. She drove home with the dahlias in the back seat, and the windows down, and the warm July air coming in, and she didn't cry the whole way. That felt important, although she couldn't have said why. The days after were the ones she hadn't planned for. You could plan for a terrible night. You could get through a terrible night on muscle memory and adrenaline and the specific stubbornness of a person who had been pressing their thumbnail into their palm for months. But the days after were the quiet days, the ordinary days, the Tuesday morning when you woke up and had to remember all over again what had happened, when the body was rude and required breakfast regardless. She worked. Her shop, called Stems, was a small storefront on the east side of Columbus. Blue door, perpetually muddy floor, the smell of eucalyptus and fresh water, and the particular sweetness of flowers that were almost at their peak. She had opened it 3 years ago, with money she had saved, and a loan from her mother, and a ferocious, slightly terrifying belief that she was good at this. She was good at this. She arranged flowers. She cut stems. She told a bride on Wednesday that white peonies would photograph better with the venue lighting than the ivory ones she had originally wanted, and she said this with the calm authority of someone who had learned not to apologize for knowing things. She drove to the wholesale market at 5:30 on Thursday morning and spent 40 minutes choosing ranunculus by touch. She went home. She ate. She slept. She did not text the number on the card in her pocket. Not yet. The card was in her jacket, which was hanging by the door, and sometimes she walked past it and thought about it. Not with urgency. With the slow, careful attention she gave things she wasn't ready to decide. She called her mother every day. Her mother was angry, in the specific way of a Nigerian woman who had welcomed someone into her house, and her family, and her heart, and been poorly thanked for it. It was a clean, focused anger, and Nadia appreciated it more than sympathy would have been. She did not call Priscilla. She was not ready to think about Priscilla yet. That was a separate room, and she was going to need a longer runway before she opened that door. She thought about what Ezra had said. "I had a strong suspicion about 2 months ago." She thought about the fact that the suspicion had been available, that she could have had it too if she had let herself. But she had been pressing her thumbnail into her palm instead, keeping herself on the surface, because the surface was the only place the engagement party could exist, and she had needed the engagement party to exist so she could make it beautiful. She had been making things beautiful for a long time. The question was, beautiful for whom? 3 weeks after the engagement party, on a Thursday morning, Nadia was at the flower market at 5:45 a.m., moving through the stalls in her jacket and boots, holding a bucket. It was early enough that the light was still low and the market smelled the way it always smelled at this hour, wet and green and a little cold, even in July, the temperature of the refrigerated trucks and the misted stalls holding out against the coming heat. She stopped at a dahlia stall. They had new stock in. Summer colors, deep orange, the exact deep orange of a late afternoon, the kind of orange that made you remember being a kid and thinking afternoon light was its own specific substance, something you could touch. She picked one up, turned it. She thought about a tent, string lights, the way they had looked when they came on at exactly the right moment. She thought about a man putting a glass of sparkling water down slowly, deliberately. She thought about, "You were nervous," said without preamble, without apology, the way you stated a fact when you respected someone enough to be direct with them. She put the dahlia down, picked it back up. She took her phone out of her jacket pocket. The card was in there too. She had moved it from the other jacket 2 weeks ago, without giving herself time to think about why. She typed the number. She typed, "The moment might be right." She did not think about it for very long. This was on purpose. She had learned, somewhat recently, that she was capable of thinking herself out of things that were good for her in the name of being careful. She put her phone away. She bought 3 bundles of the orange dahlias. She bought ranunculus and garden roses and 2 bundles of eucalyptus. She moved down the market. She was almost to the end, almost at the parking lot, when her phone buzzed. 4 minutes. The text said, "I'm free Thursday." She stopped walking. She was standing in the middle of a flower market at 6 in the morning, holding a bucket of dahlias, and she was smiling. Not a performed smile, not the kind she had put on for 43 people on a terrible evening. A real one, the kind that arrived before she had time to arrange it. She wrote back, "Today is Thursday, 3 minutes. Then, I know, she would think about that later, about the simplicity of it, about the fact that he had known today was Thursday, that she had said the moment might be right, at 5:48 in the morning on a Thursday, and he had responded in 4 minutes, which meant he had been awake. It meant he had been the kind of person who was already moving at 5:48 in the morning, the same way she was. This was probably not a coincidence. They met that evening, not for dinner, which would have been too much, for coffee, at a place she suggested, small East Side, the kind of place that was good without needing to advertise it. She got there first. She ordered an Americano. She was sitting at the table closest to the window when he came in. He had a small jar in his hand. She would find out, in about 45 seconds, that it contained Topo Chico, because he had looked up whether the place served it and confirmed they did not. She saw the jar, and she laughed before he had even sat down. He sat. He set the jar on the table. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her in the kitchen, which was to say, completely. "You look better," he said. "You can't say that," she said. "It's true. Still. Then you look like yourself," he said. "I think that might be better than better." She thought about that. She thought about what it meant for someone to look like themselves, whether that was a thing people generally aspired to, or whether it was the kind of thing you only noticed when someone had been not quite themselves for a while and had come back to the right shape. She thought she might have been not quite herself for longer than 4 months. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him, "about knowing, about why you didn't say anything." "It wasn't my place," he said again. "You could have made it your place." "Maybe," he said, "but the thing you need to know is yours to know. I've learned not to take that from people." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had brought sparkling water to a party where it wasn't served, who had watched her touch dahlias during a toast and understood what the touching meant, who had stood in a kitchen across from her and not filled the silence with reassurance but just occupied it, been there. Let her be in it. "Why did you come tonight?" she asked. "The engagement party, if you suspected what was going to happen." "Because Dominic asked me," he said. "And because," a pause, "I think I wanted to see what she was like, the woman he was making that particular mistake about. And I thought that was a very significant mistake," he said. She raised her Americano. He raised his jar of sparkling water. They didn't say anything, which was fine. Sometimes the best things didn't need a toast. Outside, Columbus was cooling down from the day. The evening was that particular shade of July blue that only lasted about 20 minutes before it became full dark, and she was glad she had gotten there early enough to see it through the window. She had spent a long time making things beautiful for rooms that didn't fully see her. She thought, "I would like to be the one who gets to look at the beautiful thing." She looked at the jar of Topo Chico on the table between them, which was arguably the least romantic object in the history of first non-dates, and she thought, maybe this is what it looks like when it's right. Not dramatic, not a grand gesture, just a person who paid attention to the right things and showed up anyway. She could work with that. She was, after all, very good at things that started small and grew into something worth keeping.